So I'm going to give you a list of 5 incredibly important pieces of information for you to become a better cinematographer, photographer, filmmaker, videographer, whatever you want to call yourself in the creative industry. And these 5 tips, in my opinion, are crazy important for you to become better in your selected field, because a lot of people will be focusing on gear and not what actually really matters. Now, the first one happens to be seeking discomfort. And I know there's a lot of creators out there that love staying in their lane and they don't really want to dip their toes into something completely different, because either they're not confident in their abilities to be able to do something in that specific field, or they just don't want to try because they are so uncomfortable about pushing their boundaries. So when it comes to seeking discomfort, you kind of want to film something that absolutely intimidates you, something that you're kind of afraid of or scared of, and putting you in a very uncomfortable position where it's only going to benefit you as a creator, because you're going to be learning a whole bunch of new skills. That could be something as simple as a new subject, a new environment, or just a whole different format of filming altogether. And this is absolutely massive for me, because one of my biggest goals for 2025 and 2026 is to film as many different sports as possible. And I was like, the last time I've actually filmed anything running related was literally like 4 years ago. And it wasn't very good. And I just really wanted to push myself and challenge myself in a very specific niche that I'm extremely uncomfortable with. So I decided to set up a couple of shoots, because I did actually need to film, some different sports for the Blazar lens review and the Sure lens review. And I really didn't want to just do what is absolutely comfortable for me, your gym content and CrossFit content. And one of the biggest reasons why you want to try and seek discomfort is that it sharpens your abilities in that creative industry, and especially in a different field that you're not used to. And essentially you're just building all your skills and your knowledge and transferring everything that you know into a very specific or different field. And the main thing you're going to gain from that new field is a whole bunch of knowledge that you can actually take for future jobs. And obviously that is going to be incredibly beneficial for you. Now, the second one's pretty massive, and I really try and dive into this absolutely every cinematography video that I do, and that's master lighting before your camera gear. And the biggest reason with lighting, well, obviously without any lights at all, you've got a black image. So you really need to understand how to create shadows, how to bounce light, and really shape light towards what you're actually doing. And I know that with running, I can actually utilize, bounce boards and negative fill, but this was just a solo run and gun thing. And sunset or sunrise is probably going to be your best option in a couple of these different scenarios, because generally when the sun is at its lowest in the sky, you have longer shadows, and creating shadows absolutely looks incredible with a lot of different types of films. So obviously the easy thing for me when it comes to the track, sunrise shoot, there's going to be no one there on the track as well. So organize a shoot sunrise and try and utilize the low angle of that sun. Now, one of the biggest things when you come down to these kind of locations is I bring up my Sunseeker app. So it's an app that allows me to see the position of the sun and where it's going to be rising in the sky. And if you are arriving just before sunrise, this is going to be extremely crucial, because you can see exactly where that sun is going to be, and then you can go over to the track or a very specific location and see where you're going to be placing your talent before you start filming. And this will just essentially allow you to position the talent and position your camera angles to exactly where you want that sun to be, and obviously where it's going to be lighting that talent. Now, obviously when it comes to naturally lit locations like this track, I would recommend not get too obsessed with the camera position in terms of if the track's running this way, if the track's running that way. Not many people will actually notice that if someone's running in this direction, then you're on the opposite side of the track and they're kind of running in that same camera direction, but technically it would be in the opposite track direction. No one will actually know. That's perfectly fine. Just shoot to what actually looks good. But if you do want to get technical, then obviously this is where you need to flip the image and obviously light it a little bit differently. Now, thirdly, once you've actually mastered your lighting, camera settings obviously is pretty important, because I know there's a lot of people that actually film sports and action at 120 frames per second or 100 frames per second. They actually just leave it in that the whole time. I don't recommend this, because your motion blur isn't going to be the same as what you would have it in 24 or 25 frames per second. And for me, I just film at 25 frames per second, because in PAL, that's what we use without electricity. I mean, it's outdoors, it's naturally lit, 24 frames per second would be perfectly fine anyway. And then 180-degree shutter with that as well. So if I'm at 24 or 25 frames per second, it's usually 1/48 or 1/50th of a second. That gives me that motion blur. And then when I actually want to slow it down, this is where I've pre-planned a whole bunch of shots so I can see which sections or which shots I actually need slowed down. Now look, I know there's a lot of people out there that just like to run and gun and sort of have that creative field on the job. that's perfectly fine. Look, if that is your process, then go for it. But don't just leave the camera in 100 or 120 frames per second. Try and choose your shots, and that's just going to make your footage look so much more cinematic and seamless when it comes to that motion blur and not too jarry and jerky. And look, if you are that kind of run and gun person, make it up on the spot, just go in between those different frame rates. That's perfectly fine. But this is where you just have to make sure you have an ND filter on the front and keep the exposure relatively consistent, because obviously if you are filming at 120 frames per second, your shutter is double that, 240th of a second, or generally in most cameras it's 1/250th of a second. So it's cutting back on the lights. You're gonna have to let a little bit more light in with that ND filter, and it's kind of vice versa with the 24 or 25 frames per second. It lets in quite a lot of light, so you're going to need an ND filter on the front to cut back on that light. But this is where you're just going to have to absolutely master your camera and what kind of settings you're using, what your exposure needs to be like, and obviously don't shoot too shallow. One of the scenes that I actually filmed, I wanted to get the foot to, go in a very particular spot, and if I filmed wide open at f1.2, that depth of field would be absolutely crazy shallow. So I dialed it back to like a 1.8, I think it was, or an f2, and then pulled back a little bit so the depth of field sort of increased. So when the talent sort of puts her foot down onto the step, I'm gonna have it in focus. And then look, just tell your talent that you're gonna be doing it multiple times potentially, just so you can get that shoot in focus. Now, obviously the fourth one is pairing the camera settings and then the lighting together. And that's kind of mastering your camera movement, your camera position, and obviously your camera angles. And this is where you can potentially just get super creative in the type of movements you're going for. But obviously, it really depends on the overall vibe that you're going for that video. So generally, when it comes to working with athletes, you kind of want to be at that chest level or a little bit lower. So you are kind of pointing the camera up at them, making them look a little bit more powerful in the frame. You don't really want to be pointing the camera down at a high angle, because it kind of makes them look smaller, inferior in the frame. Really depends on what you want to do and what the overall vibe is with the video. But like I said, this is where you're going to get super creative and really just try a whole bunch of new techniques out that you've actually seen and see what you can do with it with that particular situation. Now, one tip with this one, put your Instagram, put your TikTok, or put films on mute and just absolutely analyze the frame. Try and have a look at the framing and composition and lighting that you're actually doing, and potentially just use that as inspiration and use it in a different shoot you're going to be doing. Because that could be a powerful tool to use to obviously gain inspiration and bring your own flavor to your particular shoot. And look, the last one is one major tip that I absolutely instill into every single one of my clients, and that is shoot, edit, and repeat. You're only going to get better if you're going to continuously shoot, edit, learn from what kind of mistakes you actually made during that shoot, learn from the mistakes that you made in the edit, and then you can obviously just repeat the process, do another shoot, and try and obviously not do that same mistake. This is what's going to make you better and better and better over time. You can literally sit here and watch me on YouTube, but if you don't pick up the camera and absolutely get out there and start shooting, you're not really going to get better. Sure, you're going to have a ton of knowledge, but it really comes down to putting that knowledge into practice in your particular situation with the type of gear that you have, and obviously with the type of location you're at as well. And each project just teaches you something different composition, different pacing, and problem solving under pressure is absolutely massive on each shoot, because there's always going to be something different that kind of is a bit of a roadblock on a shoot. Let's just say, for instance, the sun rises in a very particular spot, but there happens to be a tree there. So you're going to have to move into a different location and sort the whole position out again.
I got that on film. What'd you lose, mate?
Battery.
There could literally be like construction in a very particular spot. So these are the kind of things that you really need to be sort of on your foot and ready to make changes and adjustments to your shoot. But you have to have that knowledge in your head to obviously make those changes to be able to have a really good shoot experience. So anyway, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, let's get it.